Hello, my people. Welcome to Holy Nap, holy words for unholy insomnia. Today's story is one of the most haunting and powerful journeys in the Bible. The tale of Lot, his escape from Sodom, the loss of his wife, and the strange legacy of his daughters. From fire raining down from heaven to quiet moments in a cave that shaped nations, this is a story filled with tragedy, mercy, and the mysterious hand of providence. If you enjoy timeless stories that stir both the heart and the mind, feel free to tap like and hit that bell so you won't miss the next one. And before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Are you winding down for bed or watching in the middle of a quiet afternoon? Now let's get comfortable, settle your mind, and enter a world of ancient dust, divine fire, and whispers in the dark. This is the story of Lot. Once upon a time, long before traffic lights and Instagram filters, there stretched a land of dust and golden silence, where the wind whispered secrets through the sandals of wandering nomads. Out here, in the quiet folds of Canaan, a man named Abram stood beside his tent, gazing at the stars that clung to the heavens like jewels tossed onto velvet. Abram was no ordinary man. He was a friend of God. And God? Well, he had a peculiar habit of showing up unannounced. No trumpet, no thunder. Just three strangers, walking out of the heat like mirages with dusty feet. And that's how it happened. On one of those dry, sun-baked afternoons, Abram looked up and saw them. Three men, no name tags, no introductions. But somehow, Abram knew. These weren't just any travelers, they were messengers. One of them glowed just a little too brightly in the shade. Being the hospitable desert gentleman he was, Abram ran, not walked, to greet them. He bowed low, dust clouding around his knees, and said, "My lords, if I have found favor in your eyes, don't just pass by. Sit, rest. Let me get some water and bake you a little bread. You're tired. Stay a while." A little bread, he said. What he actually served was a 3-star Bedouin feast. Fresh cakes, tender veal, creamy curds. Not bad for a man who lived in a tent. As they ate, laughter mingled with the smells of grilled meat and dust. But then, in the middle of this pleasant desert dinner, the tone shifted. The stranger, glowing slightly, looked at Abram with a gaze deeper than time and said, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" "In the tent," Abram replied, a little puzzled. Then came the words that caused a wrinkle in the fabric of reality. "By this time next year, she will have a son." From inside the tent, an old woman choked on her laughter. Sarah, who had long since stopped attending baby showers, let out a dry, skeptical snort. A baby? At her age? She was more likely to grow a second head than grow a child. But the stranger heard her. Oh, yes. "Why did Sarah laugh?" he asked, eyes twinkling. "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Suddenly, silence. Even the desert wind paused to listen. Sarah, flustered, denied laughing. "I didn't laugh." And with the gentle arrogance of someone who created starlight, he replied, "Oh, but you did." Now, after the meal, the three strangers rose to leave. But as they turned toward the horizon, something heavy lingered in the air. A divine secret not yet spoken. God paused. And then he said, almost to himself, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do?" You see, far beyond the hills and salt flats, nestled near the banks of a glittering plain, there sat two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, places where the fruit was ripe and the sin was riper, cities that gleamed in the sun by day and smoked in rumor by night. The Lord had heard cries rising from those places, cries of injustice, whispers of cruelty, shouts from the abused and the forgotten. And now, he was going to take a look himself. "I'm going down there," God said to the other two. "If what I've heard is true, judgment is coming." The other two strangers, the angels, continued on towards Sodom. But the Lord stayed back, and Abraham, sensing something ominous, stood beside him. "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" Abraham asked, his brow furrowed with holy nerves. And thus began the most awkward negotiation in the history of prayer. "If there are 50 righteous people in Sodom," Abraham said, "will you spare it?" The Lord nodded. "For 50, I will spare the whole place." "How about 45? Abraham continued, now realizing he was on to something. God agreed, and the bargaining continued. 40, 30, 20, 10, like a holy marketplace. Finally, at 10, the Lord stopped and said, "For 10 righteous people, I will not destroy it." Abraham nodded, his heart hopeful but heavy, because deep down he feared what we all fear, when the news is too quiet and the streets too loud, that the number 10 might be too high. As the Lord turned and faded back into the brightness from which he came, Abraham stood in the stillness, watching the horizon. He was thinking of his nephew, Lot, who lived in Sodom with his family, sipping the sweet water and ignoring the sour rot. And somewhere behind the hills, storm clouds began to gather. By the time the two remaining strangers reached the city gates of Sodom, the sun had dipped low, and the horizon burned gold like a warning. The city itself shimmered, a mirage of prosperity built on shaky foundations. From a distance, Sodom looked like a place of comfort, of trade, of luxury. Up close, it smelled of perfume and something rotting underneath. There, sitting at the gate like a greeter who never clocked out, was Lot, Abraham's nephew. He had traded the wide-open hills for the closed-in stone alleys of city life. He wore fine robes now, spoke the dialect, knew the baker, the banker, and the backroom deals, but his eyes were tired. You don't unsee what Sodom shows you. When Lot saw the two strangers, dust on their feet, light in their eyes, he jumped up, bowed low, and said, "My lords, please, come to my house, wash your feet, spend the night. You can leave at sunrise." The angels, yes, by now you and I both know that's what they were, politely declined. "We'll spend the night in the square," they said, casual, like tourists asking for a park bench in a war zone. Lot nearly choked. "No, no, please, not here. Trust me." And he insisted, like a man begging someone not to walk through a dangerous alley with gold coins taped to their forehead. So they came with him into his home, a modest place with a locked door and drawn curtains. Lot prepared a meal, unleavened bread, the kind that doesn't wait for yeast or trouble to rise. But trouble doesn't wait for yeast either. Before they had finished eating, there came a sound at the door, a murmuring, then shouts, then fists. The entire male population of Sodom, young and old, respectable and wild, had surrounded the house like wolves circling a lantern. They called to Lot, their voices like gravel and wine. "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so we can..." And here, dear listener, the sentence twisted into something unkind, something vile, something that made the angels go still as stone. Lot stepped outside, shut the door behind him, and pleaded, "Brothers, please don't do this wicked thing." Oh, Lot, poor, silly, desperate Lot. In a panic, trying to defuse the mob, he said the unthinkable. "Look, I have 2 daughters. They've never been with a man. Let me bring them out to you instead." Now pause, breathe. Yes, he really said that. And no, the Bible doesn't clean it up. Some things are left in the story like bones you're not supposed to swallow. Sharp, jarring, unforgettable. Lot, in trying to protect his guests, offered something sacred, something wrong. His fear had swallowed his sense. But the crowd wasn't interested in compromise. They roared louder. "Get out of our way. This man came to live among us, and now he thinks he's a judge. We'll do worse to you than to them." They surged forward, fists swinging, teeth bared. And just as the door was about to break, the 2 strangers reached out, pulled Lot inside, and shut the door with a holy slam. Then, without raising their voices or drawing swords, the angels did something divine. They struck the mob with blindness, sudden, terrifying darkness, not just of the eyes, but of understanding. The men stumbled, groping for the door they could no longer see, screaming into a night that had turned against them. Inside, the room went still. The angels turned to Lot, their faces, now fully unveiled, burned with purpose. "Do you have anyone else here?" they asked. "Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, anyone? Get them out of this place. Now, for we are about to destroy this city. The outcry to the Lord is so great. He sent us to wipe it clean." Lot nodded, trembling, and rushed out to find his sons-in-law. The men pledged to marry his daughters. He grabbed them by the arms, half whispering, half shouting, "Get up! We have to leave. The Lord is about to destroy the city." But the young men laughed. They thought he was joking. One does not simply destroy Sodom. It was too rich, too proud, too permanent, like laughing at a fire alarm during a dinner party. So Lot returned home, heartbroken. The angels stood, waiting, patient but unyielding. "Get up," they said at dawn. "Take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you'll be swept away in the punishment of the city." And still, Lot hesitated. Yes, even with smoke on the horizon and angels tugging at his sleeves, Lot hesitated. Because sin doesn't always scream, it seduces. It makes you feel safe in the cage, comfortable in the compromise. But the angels, merciful in their urgency, grabbed Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters by the hands and led them out. No more words, no more bargaining, just mercy and motion. As they left, the sky began to grow heavy. The wind changed. The air trembled. One final command: flee for your lives. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere on the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away. And so they ran. 4 figures fleeing a city soaked in sin and soon smoke. Behind them, the bells of judgment were about to ring. The sun had barely risen, but already the earth felt wrong beneath their feet. As Lot, his wife, and their 2 daughters fled across the plain, the silence behind them grew louder. Not the peaceful kind, not the kind that whispers lullabies to sleepy shepherds. No, this was the quiet before judgment breathes in. The angels were gone now, mission complete. The warning had been given. The righteous, well, the barely righteous, had been pulled from the fire line. Now heaven waited with a breath held tight. Lot was panting, lungs full of dust and dread. His wife clutched her robe, her eyes wide and wild. His daughters stumbled behind him, skirts catching on thorns, hearts hammering. And then Lot did what anxious men tend to do. He negotiated. "Please, my lord," he called out, not sure if he was speaking to heaven or just fear. "I can't make it to the mountains. Look, there's a small town nearby. Let me flee there. It's tiny, harmless. Can I live there instead?" The request was granted, almost with a divine sigh. "Fine," came the reply. "Flee to that town. We will spare it for your sake. But hurry. We can do nothing until you arrive there." So Lot ran for the town called Zoar, its name meaning little. Fitting, really. He asked for something small, and the Lord gave him a refuge the size of his faith. And then finally, the sky exhaled. From the heavens, above, beyond, and utterly righteous, the fire came down. It didn't begin with thunder or clouds. It began with heat, an unbearable divine heat that split the sky and poured down upon Sodom and Gomorrah like lava from God's own justice. Brimstone, fire, sulfur, smoke that rose in columns, thick and black, blotting out the sun. The cities, every street, every courtyard, every crumbling pillar of arrogance, became an inferno. People ran, screamed, vanished. The land moaned as if creation itself was ashamed. Trees ignited, streams boiled. Marble cracked and melted like wax. And above it all, the judgment fell, with no pause, no apology, and no mistake. From a safe distance, Lot and his daughters kept running. But his wife slowed. Something pulled at her. Maybe it was fear. Maybe nostalgia. Maybe she had left too much of herself behind in the city. Her friends, her memories, her jewelry box. Maybe she simply didn't believe the warning had teeth. Whatever the reason, she turned. Just one glance, a look over the shoulder, a moment of hesitation, painted in curiosity and longing. And in that moment, the story hardened. Lot's wife became a pillar of salt, not ash, not dust, salt, as if her life, now frozen in disobedience, should season the warning for everyone who followed. A statue carved from a single sin, the refusal to let go. And the land remembered her. For centuries, travelers would whisper about the lonely salt figure, standing where mercy had passed her by. Lot did not look back. He couldn't afford to. Grief would come later. By the time they reached Zoar, the earth had already changed. The smoke from the valley rose like a curtain, hiding what used to be. And far away, in the hills of Hebron, Abraham stood where he had last spoken with God. He looked down over the valley. He saw the smoke rising like a furnace, dark against the morning sky. His heart sank. He had bargained, pleaded, hoped. But there were not 10 righteous people, only Lot. And even that felt like a technicality. Abraham said nothing. What do you say when justice and mercy dance together and neither flinch? Now, if this were the end of the story, you might close your eyes and drift off to sleep with a tidy moral folded under your pillow. But stories like this don't wrap up in neat little bows, because sin may burn quickly, but trauma burns slow. Zoar was spared, a little town with a little mercy wrapped around it like a damp cloth over a smoldering ember. But even as Lot and his daughters stepped through its narrow streets, the air was thick, not with smoke, but with silence. A kind of hush that follows catastrophe. A kind of stillness that makes people whisper even when there's no one left to overhear. Lot should have felt safe, should have unpacked his bags and tried to rebuild. But trauma doesn't obey check-in times. The man who had hesitated at heaven's warning now found himself too afraid to stay even in a place granted by grace. Perhaps it was the stairs, perhaps it was survivor's guilt, or perhaps he finally realized you don't escape a burning city by relocating your fear. So Lot fled again. This time, not to a town, not to another rooftop with a view, but to the hills, high, empty hills where nothing grew and no one visited. He and his 2 daughters found a cave, and there they stayed. No vineyards, no neighbors, no future plans, just silence. The kind that buzzes in your ears at night when you've lost too much and said too little. Now the daughters, young, grieving, displaced, looked at one another. No husbands, no community, no weddings on the calendar. And one of them said the sort of thing you say when fear has stewed too long in a cave with no windows. There are no men around. Our father is old. Let's get him drunk and preserve our family line through him. Yes, that's what she said. And yes, the Bible writes it down, without editing, without dressing it in metaphor. A cold, awkward truth left hanging in the sandstone air. So they did. One night, the older daughter gave her father wine, so much that he didn't know whether he was sleeping or waking, dreaming or drowning, and she lay with him. The next night, the younger daughter followed. Lot knew nothing of it. Whether by choice or stupor, the text doesn't explain. But the result? 2 children, 2 sons, 2 nations. The older daughter bore a son and named him Moab, which in Hebrew conveniently translates to from father. Yes, subtle. Moab became the father of the Moabites, a nation that would one day swing between enemies and allies of Israel like a pendulum at war. The younger daughter bore a son as well, Ben-Ammi, meaning son of my people. His descendants would become the Ammonites, another thorny branch on the family tree of the Middle East. Nations born in fear, nations born in secrecy, nations born in a cave. From a man who once lived in a city built on sin and couldn't quite escape its shadow. Now pause, let's breathe. Because what kind of bedtime story ends in a cave full of confusion and scandal? A biblical one. You see, the Bible doesn't tuck all its characters into neat categories. Lot isn't a hero. He isn't a villain. He's a man caught in the middle of divine rescue and human disaster. A man who walked out of fire only to sit in silence. A man who was saved and yet still suffered. Sound familiar? Sometimes the line between righteous and reckless is as thin as the desert air. And yet, God remembered Lot, not for what he did in the cave, not for offering his daughters to a mob, not even for hesitating when told to run. God remembered Lot because Abraham asked him to, because mercy sometimes moves not by merit, but by intercession. And those sons, Moab and Ben-Ammi, God would one day redeem even their tangled beginnings. For from Moab would come a woman named Ruth, a foreigner, a widow, a stranger, who would one day become the great-grandmother of King David. Yes, that David, the shepherd with a sling, the king with a harp, the ancestor of Christ himself. So maybe that's the point, whispered gently to you as you drift towards sleep. Even when a story begins in fire, even when a chapter ends in salt, even when the last scene fades into the shadows of a cave, God still writes redemption into the margins. The end. Sleep now. The sky is calm again. The smoke has cleared, and the stars still burn above, just as they did when Abraham stood and watched. And so, from the smoldering ruins of Sodom to a quiet cave in the hills, the story of Lot comes to a close. It's a story of mercy fleeing judgment, of choices made in fear, of daughters shaping the future in silence, and of nations born, not in glory, but in the quiet aftermath of loss. If you've made it this far, and you're still awake, well, either you're incredibly devoted, or sleep is playing hard to get. But don't worry. Now, I'll read softly some verses from the Bible that echo through this story like a whisper through time. Verses about judgment, about refuge, and about the God who watches from the heights even when the valley burns. So close your eyes, get comfortable, and let the words settle your soul. Genesis 19:24. The Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Genesis 21:17. But God listened to the cry of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "Do not be afraid." Genesis 19:37 through 38. The name of the first son is Moab. He is the father of the Moabites of today. The younger also had a son, and she named him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites. Psalm 145:8. The Lord is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and rich in love. Psalm 91:1 through 2. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Lamentations 3:22-23. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Deuteronomy 4:31. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon or destroy you, or forget the covenant with your ancestors, which He confirmed to them by oath. Isaiah 55:8-9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Psalm 46:1-3. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. Breathe easy now. You're safe in the story. You're resting in the Word. Good night, and peace be with you.